Hey, welcome to this week's Bible study. We are picking up from last week with John chapter 2, verse 14. And it goes, "And he," meaning Jesus, "found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers seated at their tables." And so we'll be studying again the Life Application Study Bible and digging more into what the context of that verse. So the temple area was always crowded during Passover with thousands of out of town visitors, right? So think of events in the areas. For example, we just had the all NBA All Star weekend the last weekend, and so there's a lot of people in town and a lot of preparation for that. Think about times where you've been to a crowded city like New York or Chicago. Think about just a place where you've been where there's or the state fair, right, where there's lots and lots of people. Think about an area like that. Well, the temple area during that time, during Passover, was always crowded because that's where everyone was meeting up to perform their rites of passages for the Passover. Now, the religious leaders crowded it even further by allowing money changers and merchants to set up booths in the court of the Gentiles. So this is not only just people who were there to worship uh, and celebrate the Passover, but there were people there doing business. So money changers, they would exchange your type of coin. Say you're coming from out of town and you have Roman coins and you wanted to exchange it for Jewish coins, or you're a Greek and you have Greek coins and you want to exchange it for whatever they're accepting there at the temple. Then there were people set up there, and then there's also merchants setting up booths to sell things, along with like sacrificial animals and stuff like that. Now, the people who allowed this, right, the leaders. Did you have a question? What's your question?
My question is, do they still like switch out coins today? Like if you come from China to the U.S., do you trade like your Chinese money for the U.S. money?
Yes, they still do that today. Some call it forex trading or foreign exchange trading of. So yeah, whenever, for example, so if we went to go visit Europe one day, we would have to trade in uh, our dollars for euros, right? And so every area, whether it's a country or a region, they would have, if they have their own um, type of money, then if we get to visit there or the people there coming here were visiting, then they would have to exchange their money to whatever. That way, when they go to buy things or we go to buy things, we're spending it, and the money's being accepted at the place that they're selling and we're buying at, right? So yeah, even today they still do that. Yes.
Why do they do money exchange?
Well, like I said, they accepted money. They would only accept money that they allowed there, right? So if you, so for example, if you have a business now, right, and you're buying, you're selling things, then you wouldn't accept money that you can't take to the bank, right? Because you wouldn't be able to sell that. Say, so if you took, you got money, some European came and bought some stuff at your store. Say you love baking, right? So if you are a baker, and they went and bought some of your cupcakes, and so they gave you some euros. Well, you can't take those euros to Walmart and buy food or groceries. You can't take those euros and go to another supply store to buy your baking supplies, right? And get the supplies you need because they don't accept euros. So that's why they needed that at the time that they needed to exchange the money to that's allowed at the temple. So
Also, what are euros?
it's a type of money accepted in the European countries outside of the British, the UK, United Kingdom. Um, so it's like their dollar. That's what they call them. How do you spell euro? EURO. Okay, so now the Jewish leaders rationalized, or they came up with a reason, right, that this practice of allowing people who are money changers or merchants, they allowed that as a convenience, right? That's their reasoning, that it was convenient for the worshipers who were coming and as a way to make money for temple upkeep. So they thought that it was a good idea because they made it convenient for those who were coming in out of town, like they're coming in with different types of coins, and they were like, well, instead of them having to go out of the way, they can just exchange their money at the temple, or if they're there to buy, they don't have to drag their animals thousands or 100 miles away. They can just buy it there. And the other reason is that if they overcharge, right, they can get a little extra money for the temple upkeep, for the cleaning of it, for the replacing of maybe certain parts of the temple that are breaking inside or outside. So that's their reasoning, right? But the religious leaders did not seem to care that the court of the Gentiles was so full of merchants that foreigners found it difficult to worship. So they didn't care that it was just so many people selling, so many people there, whether they're selling or exchanging money, that people who were visiting, right, foreigners outside of Jerusalem, they found it very difficult to worship. They found it hard to focus. Think about, if you're in a crowded room and it's hard and you're trying to focus, right, and think about something, and sometimes it's hard to think. Say you're at a concert or somewhere else where you're in a very crowded space. Sometimes it's just hard to even think straight. So it was hard for people, difficult for them to find a time to worship because of just the chaos going on at that time. And worship was the main purpose, right, for visiting the temple. That was the main reason for the Mecca, for the journey to travel to Jerusalem from far away, is to worship the Lord in His holy temple. And so, the spirit of it will be disturbed when you're so distracted with the chaos going on around the area. So, there was no wonder Jesus was angry, because the focus wasn't on Him. The focus wasn't on God and the worship and spending time with the Lord. It was on other things, like the exchanging of money and selling of animals. Now, the temple tax had to be paid in local currency. So there was a temple tax that those who were visiting had to keep in mind. So foreigners had to have their money changed. So this is where we're getting a little bit deeper into the money exchange portion. But the money changers often charged exorbitant or unreasonably high exchange rates. The people so they would overcharge pretty much. So those rates. Think about those who buy a car, right? And you're getting a loan. You're always thinking about, well, what interest rate I might have to pay if you're buying a house, right? So, for example, during the pandemic area or time period, rates were very low. So a lot of people were buying and selling houses at that time during the scarcity period, where people weren't necessarily going out and building a lot of houses. The supplies, because of the economic shutdown of factories, there's not a lot of people building houses because factories weren't making wood. They weren't making the screws, nuts, and bolts, and that puts houses together, and the supplies and even appliances. Not a lot of that was happening during the pandemic, so that caused such a scarcity in the market of housing that there were a lot of the supply and demand got completely flipped upside down, and there was a lot of people wanting to buy houses and not enough houses, and because of that, the rates of the housing rates or the mortgage interest rates went down. And so that was, God deemed it a time that we were able to make our move from our former location to where we are now. We were get a very good interest rate of 2.5%. And, you may think that's not that much, but when you extrapolate it to, houses costing over 200,000 or over 100,000, whatever, that can add up to a lot of interest. So that's definitely something that at that time people were keeping in mind when they were exchanging their money. So the people also were required to make sacrifices for sins. That was the whole reason that they were there during the Jewish Passover, because they were celebrating like we talked about last week, they were celebrating the sacrificial practices of sacrificing a lamb and covering their doorpost in Egypt, so that the angel of death would pass over their houses and their firstborn wouldn't have to be killed by the angel of death. and the angel of death would pass over them on to the next house that did not have, were not covered by the blood of the lamb shared. Um, so that was part of the reason that they went to Jerusalem. And because of the long journey, many could not bring their own animals. You have to think about if you're coming from far away, it'd be hard to, one, to transfer, right, and to lug all these animals with you. You'd have to bring enough food or buy some along the way to feed these animals until you can get to the temple to do your sacrificial rites and passages. So some who brought animals, because some who brought animals had them rejected for imperfection, so they were very picky about what animals. So even if you brought your own animals, they would say, "Oh, that's not good enough because it's spotted, or because it's missing a horn, right, or this or that." They would find some reason to reject the animals you even brought yourself. So animal merchants conducted a flourishing business in the temple courtyard. So there was a lot of business going on with the selling of animals for the sacrificial rites they were performing. So the price of sacrificial animals was much higher in the temple area than elsewhere. So maybe you could have got it outside of Jerusalem in a town over for much cheaper, right? They wouldn't charge as much. Maybe you could have got it down the street, but to have the convenience of making sure that what you bought wouldn't be rejected and they were accepted, they would charge extremely high rates. So, for example, think about if you're going to a game, right? Whether it's Pacers game, Colts game, whatever game, if you ever bought some food there, you would think, wow, they're charging how much for a water bottle? $5 when you can get like a whole, 16 pack for $5 at your local store. But that's the convenience factor you have to pay. Even today, we still have to pay for convenience when we go somewhere and we want something that is easily obtainable elsewhere, but because it's convenient where you're at, they're going to charge extra. And so, Jesus is angry at this because it was dishonest. It was dishonest that they were not charging what was really the price for, right? So the exchange of money or the selling of animals, it wasn't right. It was dishonest. They were overcharging way too much for the services and the goods that they were providing. And it was greedy. It was a greedy practice of the money changers and the merchants. They were greedy, and they were thinking they were making hand over fist tons of money because they were overcharged. Maybe they could have charged double as much and pocketed some, had to give some to the temple leaders. They were being greedy and getting over people who, a lot of them may not, make that much, may not have little left in their pockets. And he particularly disliked their presence on the temple grounds. Specifically that there were people there whose sole purpose wasn't there to worship at the temple, was to make money, and they were doing it at the temple. They weren't doing it outside, right? Before you came in, they weren't doing it down the street, but they were doing at the place of worship. And Jesus really did not like that because him being God himself, he saw how the attention was taken away from worshiping the Lord, but instead on the buying and selling of things. They were making a mockery of God's house of worship. They're making like it's a clown show, like it's a circus, and it was a complete mess. And so Jesus really wasn't happy about that. Now, John also records this as the first clearing or cleansing of the temple. A second clearing occurred at the end of Jesus' ministry about 3 years later, and that event is recorded in Matthew chapter 21, verses 12 through 17. And let's see if we can get that pulled up. Hold on a second. And that says, Matthew chapter 21, verses 12 through 17. And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And so we're going to get a little bit more into the details next week and later afterwards. but here's just a quick preview in other the synoptic gospels. And he said to them, verse 13, "It is written, my house should be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den." And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he had done, and the children who were shouting in the temple, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they became indignant and said to him, "Do you hear what these children are saying?" And Jesus said to them, "Yes, have you never read, out of the mouth of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise for yourself?" And he left them and went out of the city to Bethany and spent the night there. So there's one reference of the time that Jesus cleared out the temple. It's also recorded in Mark 11, verses 12 through 19. I believe I'll pull that up real quick, but I believe it's the same. Yeah, it's kind of the same story of him driving out those people out of the temple. And it's also recorded in Luke chapter 19, verses 45 through 48. And so, yeah, so this is just a setup for what's going to happen next week, where he is going to talk about what's going to happen, right? And what made him do what he did. And so, well, we do have a little bit of time left. And so we'll read chapter 15 or verse 15 today as well, and get to a little bit more about that. So continuing in John chapter 2 verses 15, it says, "And he," Jesus, "made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables." Now, digging more into that, this time we'll be switching over to Gil's exposition of the entire Bible. And it says here that this scourge might be made cut out of the hides of beasts slain in sacrifice, or of the cords with which the owners of the cattle had brought them to this place, or with which they had fastened them in it. And it seems to be made and used not so much for force and terror as to intimate that these persons, the violators of the holy place, deserved the scourge of divine wrath and punishment, as well as to show the miraculous power of Christ in driving such a number of men before him with so small and insignificant a weapon. For the phrase is diminutive, right? So this scourge, of course, was nothing like terrifying. Like, he didn't break out a huge battle axe and started whacking people, right? He didn't bring out a huge weapon. It was just a small thing that it was surprising that he was even able to get people out of the place. But it's the power of God, with his zeal, that he was able to perform that act of driving out all these people out of the way. That is, he drove out the men, and referring specifically to the merchants. And not only that, the sellers of oxen, sheep, and doves, and the money changers, and the sheep and the oxen likewise. And he poured out the changers of money. He poured it out of the boxes, off of the tables, out of the boxes or dishes or drawers or purses in which it was put, and overthrew the tables at which they sat and on which they told or held their money. So that's what happened. And next week we're going to dig a little bit deeper into why he did that. But that's just a little preview of what happened when he saw what was going on in the temple. You know, the zeal of the Lord overcame Jesus. He saw how he was being disrespected with how they were treating his house of worship as a place for buying and selling things, and that being the primary source of distraction at a time when that was supposed to be where people worship and spend time with the Lord. So thank you for spending time with us, and we'll pick back up next week with the continuation of this story. Thank you, and God bless. Bye.